A day, what was supposed to be fun in the sun at a new Texas water park turned into a tragic nightmare when a little boy drowned. And his mother, who was allegedly sitting nearby on her phone, was the subject of serious scrutiny, and now she's facing criminal charges. But she's also filed a lawsuit saying she's not responsible. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. On May 13th, 2023, which should have been a fun day out at Camp Cohen Water Park in El Paso, Texas, it ended in a tragedy. And that is when 3-year-old Anthony Malave drowned in a 4-foot pool. And now his mother, 35-year-old Jessica Weaver, has been indicted on charges of injury to a child causing serious bodily injury or mental deficiency. Authorities say it is her fault what happened. According to witness statements in the police complaint affidavit, Weaver was allegedly not paying attention to her son before he drowned. One witness claimed to have seen a person matching the description of the defendant sitting outside the pool by herself on her phone, never looking up or paying attention to anything. Another witness reported seeing the mother, quote, singing along to a song that was playing as she laid down and looked at her phone for about 7 minutes before her child was pulled out of the water. But here is where it gets even more concerning, because a third witness told police that young boy, he was swimming not only unattended, wasn't wearing a life jacket. Now, for anybody who's been to a water park, you know how important it is for young children to wear the proper flotation devices, especially in deeper water. According to police, life vests were provided for free to anyone who needed them. There were also multiple signs at the water park reminding guests that it was a requirement for children under the age of 6 to be supervised by an adult, quote, within arm's reach. A lifeguard found Anthony in 4 feet of water. He was rushed to the hospital. It was too late. He died the next day. And now we're trying to understand how this happened, who's responsible. So to talk about the response from law enforcement and the DA's office, as well as Jessica Weaver's response, by the way, we're going to be talking about a lawsuit that has been filed. I want to bring in Texas criminal defense attorney Nicole DeBorde. Nicole, thanks so much for coming on. First, I just want to get your perspective on this case. What stands out to you other than just how tragic it is?
It's incredibly tragic. I mean, I just cannot even imagine a more horrific fact pattern. It's the loss of a child. That said, this is going to be a challenging case for the state in some ways, because what they're trying to say is that there's an absence of an act, or there's some kind of missing component for her behavior that she was not supervising. That's a little bit different than your standard injury to a child pleading that you see, at least in the state of Texas, where they're alleging some kind of physical abuse or something else that a person did that actually caused the injury. So I think that they have their work cut out for them on the state side.
I want to talk to you about the timeline here, because I find this really interesting. So Anthony died in May of 2023. And at the end of June, Weaver had apparently filed a complaint in civil court against the city of El Paso and the company that was running the water park. She's reversing the narrative, saying it's their fault. And then you go to September 22nd, 2023. That is when Weaver was arrested in her home state of Indiana, was extradited to Texas. The jail records show she was released on a $100,000 bond. Her case had been pending ever since then. And then our research indicates that it was not until December of 2024 that a grand jury indicted Weaver on the injury to a child charge. And so far, no arraignment date has been set according to court records. Hey, by the way, as you know, we talk about some very concerning stuff here on Sidebar, like this story. But I'll tell you what, we work with partners that alert us to other things that are going on and things that I wasn't even thinking of. For example, did you know that your personal data is being harvested and sold online by data brokers? Yeah, anyone can buy your personal details, apparently. And when this happens, you're at risk for a whole host of things like identity theft, becoming a target of phishing scams, potential stalking. But that is why I'm so happy to tell you about our sponsor, Delete Me. So Delete Me helps keep your personal information private. The number of data brokers that had my personal information and how much of that was listed on so many listings, it's insane. But that is where Delete Me comes in. They removed it, and they will keep monitoring the sites for you so your information doesn't find its way back on there after the first removal. And honestly, using Delete Me has also given me peace of mind about my family too, because if someone buys your data via data broker, they can see information about your relatives too. So right now you can get 20% off of Delete Me and protect your personal data when you go to joindeleteme.com/sidebar and use promo code sidebar at checkout. Okay, let's get back into this. Nicole, that's an interesting timeline, right? So the idea of she files the lawsuit, she's then arrested, takes some time for her to ultimately be indicted. Can you explain that?
Sure. So normally what happens is that a charge is filed and then immediately taken into a grand jury so that a grand jury can allow essentially the court to take control. The probable cause has to be found, and that is done in the grand jury. The case cannot proceed through the felony courts without it. Sometimes, however, and it sounds like she was out of state, it may have taken them a while to arrest her. It's possible that her lawyer or someone involved asked, can we please hold this case from a grand jury? We'd like to make sure that we can present more facts as they consider whether or not probable cause exists to even proceed. We don't know if that happened, but it's possible. Sometimes lawyers will want to bring in materials to the grand jury to try to shed light on exactly what the details were in hopes of either securing a different type of charge or what's called a no bill.
What's a no bill?
A no bill means that the grand jury finds there is insufficient probable cause. There is not enough probable cause to proceed with the case in felony court.
Okay, so what exactly are we considering here? Well, if you go back to the criminal complaint, witnesses had apparently told police that Weaver was still on her phone when lifeguards had ordered everyone out of the water while they're trying to resuscitate Anthony. And those witnesses were surprised when Weaver finally went over to see what was going on. They thought there was no way that a mom would essentially be so careless. But as I mentioned, Weaver has a different opinion about this. Weaver filed a lawsuit against the city-owned water park and the company running it, ASM Global, claiming that it was their fault her son drowned. The lawsuit says on the date in question, defendants were holding a soft opening for the new Camp Cohen water park. Rather than ensuring that guests like 3-year-old AM were safe, defendants were too concerned with packing the water park with people and ensuring that the live band was playing. But even before the date in question, defendants' conduct clearly shows that safety was not a priority. For example, a news article was posted in the El Paso Times in February of 2022 seeking lifeguards for the 4 new water parks soon to open in El Paso, including Camp Cohen. The article literally states that a lifeguard need only be 16 years or older with no experience required. An Indeed job posting made by defendant ASM Global likewise states that a lifeguard need only be 16 years or older to apply. Defendants' lack of concern for the safety of their water park guests, especially young children, was already abundantly clear long before Camp Cohen Water Park even opened. And according to the civil filing, there was video from inside the water park that apparently showed what happened, but they allege in her complaint that video's gone. The complaint states conveniently the video footage, which defendant City of El Paso was responsible for maintaining, was destroyed. So if that's true, I guess the suggestion would be, is this an attempt to cover everything up? We're going to see how that plays out. But Nicole, I want to ask you, so if we're talking about civil liability here, could you have a situation where both the water park and the company and Weaver are both responsible, right? In civil law, you can have, you could split the fault. Is it 50-50? Is it, 75-25? Am I right about that? That they could all be at fault for what happened here?
Certainly in civil court, that's definitely true, right? You can have apportionment of responsibility, right? They divide out who is how much responsible for what happened here. But in criminal court in Texas, you're either responsible criminally or you're not responsible criminally. And so you can try to ask the jury to consider the facts, right? Like, for example, why did they not have a lifeguard on duty? Why did they lead the customers to believe that there was somebody there monitoring the safety of the guests, including children, by having these lifeguards present and making space available for children to participate? The parent could have been lulled into a sense of false security that the park was actually doing something to supervise her child. On the flip side of that, these facts are incredibly egregious. She's sitting on the phone while her young child, who cannot swim apparently, is in a pool, even with notice around saying that you're responsible to supervise your child. It could be that the jurors are just very inflamed by the facts at the end of the day.
Now look, people will listen to this and say, either she's 100% guilty, she should be throw the book at her. Okay, morally, she's guilty. I think we could make that argument. But if someone's morally guilty, doesn't mean that they're legally guilty. In the law, is there a chance that she could argue, I am handing over responsibility to this third party? Okay, yes, I'm the parent, but by law, I no longer have to watch my child. I should watch my child, but I no longer have to. If I'm putting them in the care and custody of someone else, this water park, these lifeguards, or does that not work in these cases? Is there still a legal obligation on the part of the parent to still keep an eye out, still monitor their child? I mean, I wonder, were any contracts signed before entering the park? What do the signs say? Talk to us about that.
So another great question. I mean, the reality is that we don't know how a jury is going to digest these facts, right? They're going to look at these signs and what this parent did and determine whether or not her behavior rises to the level of criminal behavior. In other words, was it so reckless? Was it so perhaps intentionally disregarding of the dangers that it rises to the level of criminal conduct? And so while I think we can all agree you shouldn't be on your phone while your child is swimming around in a pool, as you said, morally responsible, the question for this jury is ultimately going to be, is she criminally responsible? Does her state of mind rise to that level?
And by the way, just to correct another point that we mentioned before, the criminal complaint does note that there were 18 lifeguards on duty at the water park that day. And again, it was a lifeguard who pulled Anthony out of the water. If that's true, if that can be proven, how does that affect her criminal case?
It could affect it in a way that the state doesn't expect. For example, the defense lawyers could come in and argue that, look, you have 18 people who are watching my child, 18 people who have made me feel that they're responsible and, you know, experts in the area of making sure that the swimmers at this water park are being tended to. And so I was not negligent by allowing those professionals to watch my child, is what she could say. Now, will the jurors go with it? I think that's a completely different question.
Now, Weaver's attorney, Ryan McLeod, is adamant that his client is being unfairly targeted. In a statement, he said, unfortunately, after Miss Weaver filed a lawsuit against the city of El Paso, the retaliatory tactics against her commenced. It's political and sad. However, we are confident that through taking depositions and obtaining evidence, as we have started to do now, the truth will prevail. And again, she's suing for negligence, wrongful death. That's an interesting statement. The suggestion would be, look, she did file the lawsuit before she was criminally charged, but I don't know if that's a suggestion that she's being criminally charged in order that the water park is let off the hook. I mean, that could be a fair suggestion that they seem to be making, that she's a scapegoat here and that she's being retaliated against for filing a lawsuit. But let's say the trial happens in the lawsuit before she's actually goes to trial on criminal charges. If she has a successful resolution in the lawsuit, if a jury finds that this water park was 100% liable for what happened, do you think the criminal charges stick?
I think that's a lot harder for them to stick. I mean, you know, look, for most prosecutions, the biggest nightmare is having a pending civil trial. And the reason is that you can get depositions. You can lock witnesses into their statements. You can get all kinds of discovery. You can gather materials that you can't sometimes force the prosecution to turn over in a criminal setting. In Texas, we're not allowed to depose, in most cases, witnesses prior to trial. In this case, however, there's a civil case. And if the civil case is allowed to run its course, you're going to get all kinds of information. To answer your question, it's going to be a lot harder for the state to prevail in a case where a civil jury has decided that the water park is fully responsible and not the parent. They have bigger problems because of the pending civil lawsuit here in Texas.
I'm going back to her criminal charges. So she faces this felony charge of injury to a child. Our understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Nicole, this is such a serious felony charge that could she receive life in prison if she's convicted? I know there's a whole wide range of sentencing guidelines based on specific definitions in the Texas Penal Code, but do you know what she could be facing if she's found guilty?
I would have to look more carefully at the pleading in this case to see exactly how it's charged, but she's most certainly facing the exposure of significant prison time. She could absolutely go to prison for a very long time. And so there's serious charges.
And what do you think about the idea, the allegation of the missing video footage, right? So if the defense is creating the narrative, they deleted footage, they only, now she's being charged, she's the scapegoat. I've seen those arguments in criminal trials before. Are they usually successful?
They can be, right? And what are they hiding? Why doesn't law enforcement, or why doesn't this water park want you to know what actually happened if they had this video? If it is found that this piece of evidence was destroyed purposefully by law enforcement or by some arm of the prosecution, it's possible that the defense could get what's called a spoliation charge in a jury charge, which would instruct jurors to assume that the missing evidence was favorable to the defendant.
Weaver's defense, they will likely argue that this was a tragic accident. It was not a crime. They're going to probably point to the alleged understaffing or poor training of the lifeguards as the real culprits for what happened. And if there is really missing video footage and they can establish that, that'll be a key component of their defense strategy. But you're also going to hear the prosecution say this was her fault. It was her duty to watch her child. She was not watching. We had signs of, by the way, we haven't even talked about the fact that there was no life vest. Can we talk about that, Nicole? How do you not put a life vest on your own child? I don't think it's the lifeguard's responsibility to put the life vest on the child, but if there were signs that said you have to make sure that your child is wearing a life vest, but it could work both ways, because maybe the lifeguard should look for children and say, why is that child not wearing a life vest? Why is that child not wearing a life vest? I think the life vest becomes a key factor too. I don't know who it's going to hurt more.
Yeah, no, the facts of this case are just so incredibly upsetting. And the absence of a life vest is just such a ridiculous, unnecessary risk that was taken in this case. And again, I think that there's the real possibility that jurors could just be so upset by the facts of this case at this particular defendant for being on her phone while her child swims in a pool or goes to a water park without making sure he's even got a life vest on. There's real risk that they look past the actual technicalities or the technical issues in the law to those facts. They're just bad.
And let's remember something before we wrap up. Talking about the legal cases, talking about the law, at the heart of the story is a little boy who lost his life far too soon. It shouldn't have happened. This is an absolute tragedy. And whatever the outcome, nothing's going to bring Anthony back. And so our thoughts are with his family members, because with this continuing cases, it only, I imagine, just reestablishes the pain they're already feeling. Nicole DeBorde, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.